Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. From the Contender series to LFA to ACA to the UFC, PFL, Bellator, KSW, Aries FC. We got 17 different promotions that we cover so that you can ensure that you have direct links to as many fights as possible for all the fighters on these upcoming events. Like I said, 17 different promotions, 4,400 profiles for you to go through, new ones being added every single day, and we have the entire 2024 schedule already up there, so you can get a head start on some of these events if you would like as well. There's a 7-day free trial for you to try it out. Find out why we have closed in on 95 subscribers on this service now. Again, 7-day free trial. Check it out for free and take full advantage of it if you enjoy doing your own researching, predicting, and breaking down fights. All right, this weekend we are back on pay-per-view for the UFC as they bring us UFC 307 headlined by two title fights. In the main event, Alex Pereira looks to defend his title for the third time, going up against Khalil Rountree. And then in the co-main event, we got the women's bantamweight title as newly minted champion Raquel Pennington looks to defend against a former champion and Juliana Pena. And not to mention, we have the return of Jose Aldo as he takes on another hot upcoming prospect and Mario Bautista. I'm very excited about this card as there is a ton of fun fights sprinkled out through this 12-fight card going down in Salt Lake City this weekend. And as an appetizer to that, there is also an ACA Russian card on Friday morning with 26 fights. I'll be breaking down every single one of those for you guys on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, the MMALOTN Patreon page. You can find that in the link in the description below, but you could also get and hop in on the Contender Series fund that we've been having this year, as I've been absolutely crushing it over there. I believe it's just over 17 units of profit for a 41% ROI, and all the people that have been watching the Contender Series videos can vouch for that as well. If you're one of them, make sure you guys drop a comment in the comment section below, but hopefully a lot of those guys hopping over to these UFC breakdowns as well, and hopefully we can change the tide of what happened at UFC Paris, which was not a good look for your boy at all. But again, I needed a little bit of a reality check after the heater that I've been on over the last couple of months through all the MMA action. So just quickly touching on UFC Paris, let's talk about the lock of the night that did not end up hitting. I was a little bit overconfident. Maybe I needed a bit of a heat check, but I was all over Matt Frevola at plus 110. Not often do I make underdogs my lock of the night play, but I felt really good about Matt Frevola, thinking that his wrestling and his control from top position would be much more effective than what we saw Claudio Puelles do against Fares Ziam in Ziam's previous matchup. But little did I know that we were going to get the best version of Fares Ziam that we've ever seen, leading to him getting his first knockout victory in the UFC with a beautiful knee in the third round, and ultimately we have to rip up that ticket. So that drops our lock of the night record to 71-35 on the year for a 67% hit rate. I don't know if I'm going to be able to hit my accuracy goal for the year. Obviously, we still got about 2 full months of events to go at it. Again, this is just not the UFC. This is including all the regional shows I cover as well. But we're still in the profit, and I'm hoping we can stay in the profit and get closer to that goal as well by the end of the year. Dog of the night, we do end up hitting with Morgan Sherrier knocking out Gabriel Miranda in the opening seconds of the second round. We had the under 1.5 as our dog of the night play there. That cash is at plus 138. Very happy with that, especially after seeing what happened in the Matt Frevola fight. So that brings our dog of the night record now to 39-70 for a 36% hit rate. We're getting back up there, getting closer to the black after a tumultuous start to the year. I'm glad that the momentum is now on our side. Let's see if we can continue getting that to go our way. Reminder, ACA breakdown strictly on the MMALOTN Patreon page. I've also dropped my official track plays for UFC 307. I'll likely be adding a few more spots later on this week, but if you want access to that and the ACA breakdowns, MMALOTN Patreon page, link in the description below. And lastly, quick plug for the GodzillaWins.com folks that provide your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns for free Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdown. Fridays, we drop the 3 best money line spots. So if you guys want access to that, go to GodzillaWins.com. Check out all the other sports that they cover as well, as we have a ton of sharp cappers and analysts to provide you guys with picks on a daily basis. That is GodzillaWins.com. All right, we got 12 fights to go through for this UFC 307 card. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First fight of the night, veterans going at it here, as we have Court McGee coming in at plus 180, going up against Tim Means, who comes in at minus 210 in this welterweight matchup. Now we'll start off on the Court McGee side of things, who's on a 3-fight losing streak. Last time around, coming up short against Alex Morono in a matchup where he had success in the second round, but a lot of that had to do from the poor decision-making of Alex Morono. He slapped on a guillotine choke in the opening seconds of the second round and pulled guard, but unfortunately did not pay off for him, allowing McGee to grind out the rest of that round and win it on the scorecards. But unfortunately for McGee, he was unable to get much success going on into the third round, allowing Morono to fight back into the matchup with his striking heavy approach, landing his big damage from outside and winning that fight on the scorecards. Now, McGee is a guy that's in the past highly relied on his durability and his ability to put a pace on his opponents, but unfortunately that has not worked out for him in 2 of his last 3 fights. We saw Jeremiah Wells and Matt Brown knock him out in the first round, and you're starting to see that the miles are really starting to catch up to Court McGee, especially with him being about 2 months short of his 40th birthday. He was a tough test for a lot of veterans, but we see that with his 3-8 record over his last 11 fights, things are really starting to get on the tail end of his career, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up hanging up the gloves in 2025. His opponent this weekend might also want to consider retirement, considering that he is 40 years old, and I believe he will be 41 early next year. But Tim Means is 1-4 over his last 5 fights, last time around getting knocked out by Uros Medic in the first round. Now, durability has been a concern for Means throughout his career, but previous to that Medic fight, he had not been knocked out in over 5 years. It was showing that his durability was finally starting to regain its health a little bit. Although he has been rocked and dropped in some of those matchups, he was not finished in those fights other than the Medic one that just happened back in April. Means is normally a guy that likes to utilize his striking heavy approach, loves to utilize the clinch with his knees and his elbows up the middle, does a great job in terms of putting combinations together and utilizing his footwork to maximize his striking, and he is just a flat-out veteran. You're talking about a guy coming into his 51st professional MMA fight. Again, both these guys should likely think about hanging it up in 2025, but I'm glad that the UFC has decided to put them up against one another. I do lean Means pretty good in this matchup, as I don't think that Court McGee has much of a knockout threat to worry about. With me just saying that, I am getting PTSD to saying that about Fares Ziam last week, and we saw what happened with what he did against Frivola, but I'm hoping that Means can kind of nullify the low percentage of McGee actually finding a knockout in the spot. Look for Means to utilize a classic Means approach, his volume and his pressure from distance, his knees and his elbows, and landing the more damaging blows against McGee, who will likely be up there in terms of output, but I still think we'll see Means chip away at McGee and then end up winning this fight on the scorecards. I wouldn't completely count out a knockout from the Means side of things, but I'm still going to lean with Means by decision and possibly think of him as a parlay piece. Next up, women's strawweights going at it here, as we have Carla Esparza coming into the cage as a first-time mother, coming in at plus 135. She's going up against Tisha Pennington, who's coming in at minus 155. Now, Carla Esparza, former 2-time women's strawweight champion. Last time around, she ended up losing the title at the ending of November to Weili Zhang in a fight where she was just physically overwhelmed. Zhang gets her into a very bad spot and ends up finding the submission finish. But Esparza is a fighter leading up to that matchup who had a 5-fight winning streak, including the win that got her strawweight title back after the debut that she had in the UFC over 10 years ago, where she won the title against Rose Namajunas, and surprisingly enough, she beats her again to win the title last time, or 2 fights ago. 36 years old, soon to be 37, gave birth last September, so it's been over a year since she's been out of action and looking to recover, get her body back into shape so that she could have this retirement fight. And we know what she's all about. Her striking, very mediocre to low level, but it's her wrestling and grappling abilities that have made her so successful and which has seen her get those wins over the likes of Alexa Grasso, Marina Rodriguez, Yan Xiaonan, and the Rose Namajunas fight to a certain extent. That was a very tepid pace and very just weird fight overall. She's a pioneer in women's MMA pretty much, right? She was a hot prospect coming off the Invicta scene, going into the Ultimate Fighter, solid amount of victories inside the UFC as well. Very good wrestling, but it seems like this point of MMA and just the way that it's revolutionized, wrestling is not being as effective anymore, especially when fighters find it hard to either get submissions or to land enough damage from that top control. Just getting top control is not enough at this day and age. We can see that fighters have been able to chip away at wrestlers with the damage they're able to land in the striking realm, and nullifying the control that ends up being accrued on the opponent's side. In this matchup against Tisha Pennington, she's also coming off of a fight where she was coming in as a first-time mom. She went up against Tabitha Ricci just under a year after she had given birth, and she made a very good account of herself, losing by split decision that night. I thought she deserved the win. I thought she landed more damage throughout that matchup, but the judges did not end up seeing it that way, or at least 2 of the 3 did not see it that way. But we did see some good things from Pennington. Good takedown defense, good striking as we always come to expect from her, good speed, good cardio. But again, 35, close to being 36, a mom as well. Usually that's not the best sign of somebody that would have a ton of success inside the octagon and at this level. It's interesting to have 2 recent moms go up against each other here, but I do have to lean ever so slightly to the Tisha Pennington side. Again, this is a rematch of a fight that actually took place on the Ultimate Fighter over 10 years ago, and that was only a 2-round fight that was largely controlled by Esparza getting the takedowns and not really getting off too much damage, but the control back then was weighed more heavily than the damage of strikes that strikers have been able to land against grapplers. Now, though, I think we'll see Pennington showcase better takedown defense and land more damage here. I think she is the way better striker, and I think if we see what we saw in the Tabitha Ricci fight in terms of the striking success she had there, she should be able to land more often against Esparza here and end up just edging this fight out on the scorecards. Very close fight. I can see the line already starting to close a little bit as Pennington was minus 170 yesterday, so I can see people giving love to Esparza and the wrestler-heavy approach she'll likely bring to the table here. But I think the speed and striking advantage of Pennington will end up getting her the victory here. I'm just not so confident in terms of actually taking the minus 155 here. If this was closer to a pick'em spot, I'd be happy to take a shot on Pennington. So I'll definitely monitor the line as we get closer to fight day, but I'd be surprised if it actually drops that much. All right, next up, Ryan Spann coming in at minus 250, going up against St Preux, coming in at plus 200. Now, I believe this fight was originally supposed to take place back in August, and Ryan Spann actually closed as a minus 300 favorite that night. Unfortunately, Spann was forced to pull out of the fight, and now they get it rescheduled for this weekend. But there has been some love coming in on St Preux, hence why we're seeing Ryan Spann down to that minus 250, actually minus 235 line now with his 3-fight losing streak that he has coming into this matchup. Last time around, he got knocked out by Bogdan Guskov after taking a grapple-heavy approach early in that matchup and being unable to put Guskov away. He started to slow down later on, and that's where Guskov was able to take over and find that TKO finish. I think Spann is very reliant on getting that early finish, utilizing his speed, explosiveness, and power, which usually starts to dwindle later on in fights because he just has not looked that effective later on in his matchups. And I think that continues to show even in the Anthony Smith fight that he lost 2 fights ago. That was a fight where he had Smith hurt very badly in the second round, and I think even broke Smith's orbital, but he was unable to muster up enough success in that third round, which allowed Smith to sneak back in and end up winning that fight on the scorecards because he won rounds 1 and 3. Again, Spann, 33 years old. I think he's kind of stuck in his ways of just trying to get the grappling going, and if it doesn't pay off for him, he starts to dwindle down in terms of efficiency in deep waters, or he just goes out there and gets these quick finishes early and doesn't have to worry about his cardio falling off later on in fights. He goes up against veteran St Preux, who's 41 years old and coming off of a decision victory over Kennedy Nzechukwu. OSP is one of the most volatile fighters to bet on or against, considering sometimes he shows up Sometimes his chin doesn't show up and he gets knocked out pretty quickly, but there are other times where he's able to traverse the cage very well, utilize that leaning back left hook, I believe that he has, the kicking game up the middle, utilizing a lot of movement and just staying away from the power of his opponents. And then sometimes he's been able to eat some shots and he looks fine, and then he can get to his own game as well. He's one of the, again, the mysteries of the light heavyweight division, considering sometimes his veteran experience will come through for him and sometimes it just doesn't show up at all, and we see him getting his lights knocked out completely. Now, on paper, sure, Ryan Spann probably just goes out there and dusts Ovin St Preux. But I think St Preux has shown in fights in the past that he can deal with power punchers and still get to his game. So then it starts coming down to what you see on the odds. Now, I know there's a large population of guys that just don't even consider odds and just say, hey, Ryan Spann's going to win this fight and I'm going to bet him no matter what. But that's what a lot of people said with Kennedy and Zechiku last time around with Ovin St Preux, and they ended up biting their words, or eating their words, I should say. Here, I lean ever so slightly to Ovin St Preux's veteran experience coming through for him. I think we'll see him traverse the cage very well, keep Ryan Spann at distance, utilize that teep to the body to keep Ryan Spann at bay, utilize his counter striking from his back foot to land on Ryan Spann. I lean OSP ever so slightly here, and plus 200 is a little bit intriguing for me, especially considering the recent form that we've been seeing from Ryan Spann. Over the course of 15 minutes, I would favor Ovin St Preux as well. Maybe get a damn good line on his decision prop, considering he's a plus 200 underdog. Decision, this fight not really being tapped to go to a decision either. I'll lean St Preux ever so slightly here to win by decision. Again, I'll see what the line movement's like. Maybe we get some late week action on Ryan Spann and we get Ovin St Preux back up to that plus 250-ish line. But yeah, very weird fight, very volatile. I would bet the odds more than thinking who you think is going to win in this matchup, in my opinion. All right, next up. Cesar Almeida coming in at minus 380 in this middleweight matchup, going up against Ihor Potieria, who comes in at plus 305. Now, last time around, Cesar Almeida really let me down as he did not showcase the takedown defense nor the urgency to work back to his feet that we've seen in prior fights that allowed Roman Kopylov to get him down when he needed to in the second and third rounds. Even though Kopylov was showing signs of slowing down, Almeida just didn't do enough in those late rounds to get the judges to see the fight in his favor. He did lose a split decision that night, meaning that at least one judge scored that fight in his favor. But again, still not the type of performance I was expecting from Almeida, considering what we've seen from him in the past. He's a very dangerous striker, especially when he gets to his combinations and his kicking game. And he's very good in terms of stalking his opponents and landing straight shots down the pipe to cause them a lot of issues. Again, if he can hone in on the takedown defense and get ups that we saw from him in fights against guys like Dylan Budka and Lucas Fernando, he will benefit from that heavily, especially in this middleweight division where a lot of guys are going to be looking to stay away from his striking and try to get him into the clinch in the takedown game to stay away from that power that he possesses. I got to admit, I'm a little bit surprised that he's such a big favorite here against Ihor Potieria, who I've been very low on in my throughout his 5 or 6 fight UFC career. Potieria is a guy coming off of a submission loss to Michel Pereira last time around. That happened within less than a minute. Prior to that, he went out there and gave Robert Burchak the first loss in his UFC debut. And Potieria utilized a very different approach than we've been seeing from him in the past. Usually he goes out there and just looks to starch guys in the first minute of their fights or first round of their fights, or he gasses out and allows guys to finish him in the second or third rounds. With the Burchak fight, he took a tepid striking approach. It kind of seemed like he knew what kind of combinations his opponent was going to be throwing, and he countered effectively, landing with big power and ultimately winning that fight on the scorecards. That was a short notice debut at middleweight for Potieria, debuting at that 185-pound weight class, and he did miss the mark by a pound and a half. We saw him last time make the mark, but ultimately we did not see too much of that fight, considering Pereira's ability to finish that quickly. Now I'm thinking we might see a little bit more of that in this fight against Almeida, especially if you can get out of that first or second minute with the vitriol and ferocity that we normally see Almeida throwing with. Again, Potieria possesses a ton of power himself, so I wouldn't count out a possibility of him landing a big shot. You got to take into consideration that Cesar Almeida is almost 37 years old as well. He'll be 37 in March. He only has 6 fights of experience. I know he has a huge kickboxing background that he can lean on as well, but at the end of the day, this is mixed martial arts. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Potieria possibly look to get a grapple-heavy approach going here, which could pay off for him. Now, the other aspect of this fight to look into, and something to consider for other fights as well, is the altitude. Salt Lake City. You'll see fighters slow down later on in matchups, especially if they're utilizing an approach that usually takes a lot of energy. Grapple-heavy approaches is something to consider, especially with Potieria, who is not used to taking that type of approach in his fights. So it could either tax Potieria in terms of looking for takedowns, maybe failing on them, or Almeida in terms of defending those takedowns and possibly becoming worse in defending those takedowns later on in the matchup, just as we saw in the Kopylov fight. So, again, minus 385, in my opinion, is usually reserved for those guys that have advantages in pretty much every aspect of the game here. Obviously, Almeida has a striking advantage here, but grappling is still yet to be determined. I'm going to pick Almeida here. I think he wins by knockout, but both of those lines very chalky, so it's tough to get enough value on those spots, but I will also pick Almeida to win. I would just be a little bit cautious in terms of throwing him into too many parlays and putting all your eggs in that basket, but I'll take him to win this fight and to win it by knockout. All right, next up, we got a lightweight matchup between Austin Hubbard, who comes in at plus 150, going up against Alexander Hernandez, who comes in at minus 175. We'll start off on the Austin Hubbard side of things, who made a successful return to the win column last time around with a decision victory over Michal Figlak, which was seen as quite controversial. Even though it was a unanimous decision with Austin Hubbard winning the first 2 rounds on all 3 judges' scorecards, a lot of people believe that Figlak should have gotten the win there, considering the damage that he was landing and kind of nullifying the control time and takedowns that Austin Hubbard was landing in that fight. And that's kind of been the MO for Hubbard in this stage of his career after at least getting cut from the UFC the first time around, is that he's starting to use a lot more grappling than we've seen from him in the past. He is a solid striker, and we know that his nickname Thud comes from the sound that he usually makes when he lands his kicks, which are so heavy and laboring to a lot of opponents. But seeing him utilize grappling behind his striking has allowed him to be successful, which is why we saw him successful through the Ultimate Fighter, getting to that finale against Kurt Hollabaugh, who just had a little bit too much pace and pressure and too much violence for Hubbard to keep up in that matchup. But we saw it pay off for him in the first 2 rounds of the Figlak fight. 32 years old, clearly in his prime, clearly has rounded out his game well enough, but the question is, if he can't get his wrestling going completely, how will he do against guys that are better strikers or more violent strikers who should be able to land with more damage? And we could see that question answered here against Alexander Hernandez, who finally returns back to the 155-pound division after going 0-3 at 145 pounds, which I never really thought was a great idea for him in the first place. Now, last time around, he lost a split decision to Damon Jackson in a fight that probably could have gone either way, but it seemed like Damon Jackson got more damage and control time, and that probably should have been favored more than anything that Hernandez was doing. Hernandez did have a bright moment in that 3rd round where he dropped Damon Jackson, had some good control time from that top position, but then Jackson was able to battle back into that round, but still ended up losing that on the scorecards. Hernandez is much better than he was originally in the first couple fights that he had in the UFC. Making your debut on short notice and knocking out a guy like Beneil Dariush, he was off to the races, but unfortunately for him, he eventually ran into a veteran like Donald Cerrone, who picked him apart and eventually finished him. Now he's 1-4 over his last 5 fights, and I think a lot of that had to do with his decision to go down to 145 pounds. That's just not a good idea considering how much weight he was cutting and clearly how depleted he looked whenever he was in action there. He is a guy that is trying to harness the athleticism and explosivity with his striking, throwing more combinations, landing some leg kicks, and knowing the right times to get his wrestling going. In this matchup against Austin Hubbard, he's likely going to have to use that wrestling defensively. And knowing that he's back up at 155 pounds, I feel like he can do a good enough job defensively here that he can start to get to his game in the striking realm, where the physical advantages that he'll have will likely end up being too much for Austin Hubbard. Hubbard could definitely be competitive in terms of the output and volume that he'll throw on the leg kicks that he can throw on the body kicks. But I think Hernandez will end up getting to the target a lot quicker with more power and landing with more significance, which will likely resonate with the judges a little bit better should this fight actually get to the scorecards. I'm actually going to go Hernandez by knockout here, though. The only issue in terms of actually committing to actually placing a bet on Hernandez is that he's just a little bit too flaky at times to completely trust at a minus 175 line. If it's closer to that minus 150, maybe even lower than that, and we are seeing the line start to climb down a little bit, maybe I would be a little bit more confident in him there, because I do believe that he is a solid force on 155 pounds, and I think that this is a great stylistic matchup for him to showcase that once again. So I'm going to go Hernandez here. Hernandez by knockout. I'll keep an eye on the line, but I wouldn't be mad if I end up having to pass on this matchup. All right, next up, women's strawweight matchup here, as we have Marina Rodriguez coming in at plus 165, going up against Yasmin Lucindo, who comes in at minus 190. Now, the 37-year-old Marina Rodriguez is coming off of a split decision loss to Jessica Andrade last time around, and that was a fight that she just lost by the skin of her teeth. She lost the first round, clearly. The second round, she was winning about 4 minutes of it with better volume, better damage, better output, but she had a lapse. I don't know, just a complete brain fart in that last minute of the second round that allowed Jessica Andrade to battle back into the round, landing a barrage of combinations to close out that round, which ultimately swayed two judges to Andrade's side. And then when we saw Marina Rodriguez get back to her game in the third round, she won that round without a doubt. But unfortunately, the mistake that she had in the second round cost her that fight and ultimately getting her back on the losing track. We know that she's still capable of very dominant performances and very good performances, just as we saw when she absolutely beat the piss out of Michelle Waterson-Gomez 2 fights ago. Very good Muay Thai, very good elbows, very good knees, very good kicks, developing takedown defense and get-ups. That's obviously where opponents have been able to grind her out in the past, but we are seeing her get better in terms of nullifying that type of approach from a lot of her opponents so that she can operate in the distance and space that she seems most confident and comfortable, and that's obviously the striking realm. Her opponent this weekend is 22-year-old Yasmin Lucindo, who currently finds herself on a 3-fight winning streak after dropping her UFC debut against Yasmin Yargui back in August of 2022. We saw her beat Brogan Walker by decision, submit Poliana Viena, and then go out there and just clean sweep Karolina Kowalkiewicz on the scorecards. In that fight against Kowalkiewicz, we saw her be very competitive in the striking realm against the striker and Kowalkiewicz, but she managed to stamp every single round with the takedowns, which is where Kowalkiewicz has struggled in the past. I will say I am not the most impressed with Lucindo's ability to control opponents on the ground, and that could be where she starts running into issues against the veteran Marina Rodriguez. Now, I get it. Lucindo, she has 21 fights compared to the 23 fights that Rodriguez has, but there's clearly a strength of schedule difference compared to what Rodriguez has been facing in recent years and what Lucindo has been facing on her come up into the UFC. She's very promising. She's been training alongside Verna Jandiroba for the last couple of years, who actually has a win over Marina Rodriguez just 3 fights ago. Her striking is coming along. Her wrestling is very good as well. It's just I would like to see her tighten up the control a little bit more so that she can enjoy more time in that top position and potentially look for submission and finishing opportunities. I have to lean ever so slightly to the Marina Rodriguez side here. You know, we saw what happened when a fighter can get into the striking groove against Lucindo and stop the takedowns and keep this in the striking realm when Yargui faced Lucindo. And that fight was just over 2 years ago. Now, I get it. Lucindo has definitely improved since then, but I think that Rodriguez is still that much of a superior striker to Lucindo, and I'm hoping that her takedown defense and get-ups are still good enough to deal with what Lucindo brings to the table. I have no doubt that Lucindo can land a few takedowns in this matchup, but I just doubt her ability to control Rodriguez for extended periods of time, which will allow Rodriguez to get back to the feet, get back to her striking game, get back to the output, and hopefully not have any brain farts like she had in the Jessica Andrade fight. So I'm going to go with Rodriguez to pull off the upset here. I think she wins this fight by decision. If she wasn't 37, I'd probably have a little bit more confidence in it, but I still feel she can showcase enough of a striking advantage in this matchup to still get her hand raised over the youngster Yasmin Lucindo. So give me Marina Rodriguez and Rodriguez by decision. All right, next up we go to the welterweight division with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson coming in at plus 185, going up against Joaquin Buckley, who comes in at minus 220. Now we'll start off on the Stephen Thompson side, who has been kind of mistreated from the UFC over the last year or so. He did pick up a win over Kevin Holland. I believe that was at the ending of 2022. That was a matchup where he managed to get Kevin Holland to agree to a striking matchup. And then I think in the third or fourth round is when we saw Holland start to go for takedowns. By then it was a little bit too late. And then he ultimately ended up quitting on the stool after 4 rounds, handing Thompson a victory and snapping the 2-fight losing streak he had going into that. Then, if you guys remember, Thompson was actually scheduled to fight Michel Pereira, but Pereira missed weight pretty badly, and Wonderboy Thompson refused to fight him. Thus, the UFC was very pissed off at him, but Thompson did point to the loss that he took at the hands of Darren Till. Very close fight that he took after Till had missed weight, and he kind of points to that as to, hey, I'm 41 years old. I shouldn't be taking these unnecessary risks. And if a guy misses weight, he misses weight. That could allow him to have an advantage in that matchup. And I don't want him to have that, especially considering that, the flaw in Thompson's game is usually guys looking to take him to the ground. And I wouldn't be surprised if Pereira actually looked to do that after maybe eating one too many shots from Thompson on the feet. So the UFC decided to match him up against Shavkat Rakhmonov. And that fight went exactly how we expected it to. Now, one thing I quickly want to point out about that fight was that Dana was so surprised to see a grapple-heavy approach out of Rakhmonov that night, but it's like he's never seen Rakhmonov fight before, because that's how Rakhmonov normally likes to get his fights done. He takes opponents to the ground and he looks to submit them or TKO them from that top position. He will throw in the striking realm, sure, but I think he gets his best work done when he's able to get fights to the ground, and that's exactly what he ended up doing to Thompson, eventually submitting him in the second round of their matchup. That's been the kryptonite at this stage of Thompson's career, is that he just doesn't get it together with the defensive grappling so that he can't get to a striking game. He's shown some decent get-ups and takedown defense in certain spots, but when opponents can really put him through that grind, keep him on his back, keep him up against the cage, keep him from getting to his point fighting karate style, that's where Thompson really starts to struggle and can get off on his own offense. Mix in the fact that he's 41 and the style that he brings to the table normally relies heavily on the physical capabilities, the speed, reflexes, and just reflexes pretty much. It's going to start to look bad for Thompson over the next couple of fights. He's probably getting paid a bag. I mean, he was a 2-time title challenger. He's been up there against the best of them. He's been with the company for 10 plus years, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's getting 6 figures from the UFC, win and loss, or win or lose. So I understand probably why he's still fighting. But he's going up against a very tough Joaquin Buckley. After losing to Chris Curtis in a fight that I thought that he was controlling for the most part, Joaquin Buckley has managed to bounce back with 4 straight victories, finishing 2 of those opponents, and last time around grinding out the very dangerous and streaking Nursultan Ruziboev. There was a huge height and reach advantage for Ruziboev that night, but Buckley did a great job in terms of crashing the pocket and showcasing his wrestling approach that he's been taking to heart over the last couple of fights and has been paying off for him very well. Now, Buckley has normally been a guy that searches for the head of his opponents, looks to knock it into the 7th row of the stands, and tries to pretty much knock everybody out. But he's done a great job in terms of mixing that style with a grappling style so that he can put together a good enough MMA game and package should fights go to the scorecards that the judges end up favoring him to win in that fashion. He's 30 years old, clearly coming into his prime, and the maturity and growth that we've been seeing him over since coming into the UFC is very encouraging for a guy that was kind of being thrown into the spotlight after that highlight reel knockout that he had over Impa Kasanganay back on Fight Island in, I believe, 2020 or 2021. The UFC tried pushing him a little bit too much, and it ended up kind of costing them. But now that he's finally gotten into a groove of not just trusting the knockout, but putting together a better overall game, it's starting to work out for him more often than not. Now, in this matchup against Thompson might have the advantage in terms of strength of schedule, but 41 years old, struggling against wrestlers, and now being able to trust Buckley to go out there and put together a wrestler-heavy game plan, I fully expect him to go out there and do that to Thompson. I think that his speed and power advantage could allow him to stay safe in the striking realm, but a lot of this success is going to come for him looking to get Thompson to the ground and grinding him out from that top position. I think Buckley has shown a comfortability with doing that over 15 minutes and showcasing he has the cardio to do so. Does the altitude play into my decision here? Not a whole lot. I think Buckley is in very good shape and he's shown great cardio throughout his career, especially in recent fights. And I think that he'll be able to showcase it once again here and put on a very dominant performance over Thompson and grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. All right, next up. middleweights going at it here, as we have Roman Dolidze coming in at plus 120 going up against Kevin Holland, who comes in at minus 140. Now, we'll start off on the Roman Dolidze side, who's coming off of a short notice victory up at light heavyweight against Anthony Smith. I believe that was back at UFC 303, and that was a fight that he took on very short notice because of all the kerfuffle that was going on with 303 and the McGregor and Chandler fight falling out last minute there. But Dolidze managed to come in, put on a bit of a pace and pressure on Smith and break Smith pretty much and win that fight on the scorecards. I believe he doubled him up on strikes that night as well with like 100 to 50 in terms of significant strike advantage. But we've seen the ceiling of Dolidze, and a lot of that can be pointed to the fight that he had earlier this year in a main event slot against Nasruddin Imavov in a fight that he was unable to get his game going. You know, when more technical strikers and disciplined strikers are going up against a reckless and wild guy like Dolidze, they're able to pick him apart and make him pay for a lot of those mistakes that he makes. His jiu-jitsu is not that bad, his grappling is not that bad, but I just don't think it's a style that he tries to lean on too heavily because of his inability to control positions for extended periods of time. He's just an aggressive fighter. He knows nothing but go, and that's usually how he ends up beating his opponents. But I think we know where his ceiling's at. He's 36 years old. We know what type of fighters he's going to come up short against. And I feel like he's fighting one of those guys this weekend in Kevin Holland, who's coming off of a nasty submission victory over Michal Oleksiejczuk last time. Now, Oleksiejczuk made a very bad move, right? He dropped Kevin Holland, but for some reason followed him to the ground, following a BJJ black belt to the ground, and then ended up getting caught in an armbar, and Holland was able to get the technical submission victory there as he seemingly broke Oleksiejczuk's arm. That snapped a 2-fight losing streak for Holland as he ended up coming up short against guys like Jack Della Maddalena and Michael Venom Page. But I think that we're going to see Holland just get into the groove of having fun once again. I think that's why we're seeing him back at 185 pounds, knowing that he's probably not going to make a run at 170, and he's just been bouncing back and forth between those divisions recently because he just wants to go out there, fight, have fun, maybe cash a couple of performance bonuses as well. But he's clearly a fighter that the UFC can rely on in terms of bringing eyeballs to the TV or to their fights, but also to provide entertaining fights depending on the fighter that he's going up against. He can have an entertaining fight here against Roman Dolidze. I think his sniping-like style will pay off for him heavily, especially against the wild and reckless style that we know from Dolidze. Look for Kevin Holland to utilize good range management, utilize his 5-inch height advantage or reach advantage to keep Roman Dolidze at bay, utilize his speed and his precision to land those shots down the pipe, utilize his kicks to keep Dolidze at range, and utilize his BJJ should Dolidze look to take this fight to the ground to stay active enough in terms of not allowing Dolidze to get a lot of control time or maybe even pulling off a submission off of his back once again. I do think Dolidze is very hard to put away, as we've seen throughout his career. So I'm going to lean Holland to chip away at him and win this fight on the scorecards. But I see the line continue to go down, which I'm kind of surprised by. So even at minus 140 here, I think Holland is more than worth a shot on the money line. I just think he's the superior mixed martial artist here. And I think he'll be able to thwart the aggressive nature of Dolidze and land the better shots, land the better strikes, and end up winning this fight on the scorecards. All right, next up, women's bantamweights going out of here. Probably a number one contender fight, but also a backup spot for Kayla Harrison should anything happen to the co-main event. But we got Ketlen Vieira coming in at plus 750 going up against Kayla Harrison, who comes in at minus 1200. Now we'll start off on the Ketlen Vieira side, who came off of a dominant grappling victory over Penny Kianzad last time around, where she was able to out-grapple her for over 2.5 rounds before Kianzad was able to reverse the position, but ultimately not do enough to win back that round and get the judge's decision. Vieira, normally a striker, has been leaning on her grappling in some fights where she's been able to get some solid control time and good damage from that top position, but I think a lot of that has to do with the physicality she brings to the table. I think the biggest win of Ketlen Vieira's career was the one that she got over Holly Holm, which was a bit of a sketchy decision to some people, but she did land quite a lot of damage that night, which ended up allowing her to get that main event victory. Unfortunately, she lost a close fight to Raquel Pennington, and had she won that fight, she probably would have been the one fighting for a title at the beginning of the year against Mauro Bueno Silva, but that was just probably something that happened in another universe or another timeline. She goes up against Kayla Harrison, who made a very dominant UFC debut at UFC 300 as she took down Holly Holm and had her way with her from that top position, eventually opening up a submission opportunity in the second round that she was able to get the tap. And now I think that we're starting to see how dominant Kayla Harrison can be, especially with her ability to now use elbows. And I think my favorite moment that Kayla Harrison has ever had is her fight that she had in Invicta. And I plead for you guys to go back and watch that fight against Courtney King, I believe her opponent's name was. And that was the first fight where we saw Harrison freely able to use elbows due to PFL's rule sets that keep elbows out of action. But you saw where she was able to get that top position and start raining down big shots, and how bloody she was able to get her opponent. And then after she got the stoppage, you see her get up and she was just like, like she's like, oh my God, what did I just do? And that just goes to show how dominant she can be and how dangerous she can be when she establishes that top position. Olympic level judoka, you see it with how dominant she is when she's able to get those takedowns on those throws. Holly Holm almost reversed her, or actually did reverse her on the first throw that Harrison got on her in that first round. But Harrison used her urgency immediately to work back to her feet and then get back to a dominant position and get to her game. She's dominant, man. She might be the best women's mixed martial arts in the UFC now that Amanda Nunes is retired or has been retired. I know there's inklings of Nunes wanting to make the return should Harrison eventually get the title again. But yeah, her striking is slowly coming along. But it's really her ability to close that distance, get a hold of her opponents, drag them to the ground, slam them to the ground, and then do big work from that top position. I think Vieira is going to be a little bit harder to put away than Holly Holm was. I think we'll see a little bit more resistance from Vieira here. So I think we end up seeing Harrison actually win this fight on the scorecards. Plus 120, I think, is the line on the decision prop here on Harrison. I don't know if I'll actually get to the betting window on that. Minus 200 is prohibitive. I don't care if you have a 10 out of 10 level confidence on Harrison here. Again, minus 1200. In a game like mixed martial arts, the volatility is just too much. It's not worth it. I would try to hone in on a prop that you feel more comfortable with. I'm going to go decision plus 120, but I do think Harrison wins this quite dominantly, and it probably comes by decision. All right, next up, Jose Aldo making his return, looking to build upon his victory over Jonathan Martinez back in June, coming in as a plus 125 underdog, going up against Mario Bautista, who comes in at minus 145. Now, I was very happy to get underdog odds on Jose Aldo back in June against a fighter in Martinez, who was streaking, clearly on a run, looking very dominant in a lot of his fights, but a lot of people were overlooking the lack of finishing threat and power from Martinez, allowed Jose Aldo to pretty much dictate the pace of that fight with the power and explosiveness that he has, and nearly even finishing Martinez in the third round of that fight. I think we saw classic Jose Aldo there, getting into his groove with his striking, landing big shots, landing big power, and breaking Martinez probably 7 minutes into that matchup and controlling the rest of it. 38 years old, he's obviously getting up there, and it's all matchup dependent on terms of if he's still going to be able to get his hand raised at this stage of his career or not. And I thought that Martinez fight was a perfect one. A guy that likely would not look to grapple him, and a guy that would struggle to go strike for strike with him. We know where Aldo's ceiling is, right? He's still able to beat the Pedro Munozes, the Marlon Veras, the Jonathan Martinezes of the world, but he'll come up short against the eventual champion, Merab Dvalishvili, just as we saw in what we thought was going to be his retirement fight. I don't know if money brought him back out of retirement. Maybe the UFC saying, hey, we don't have too much star power nowadays, especially on that UFC, 301 card that he competed on in June. It was Steve Erceg against Alexandre Pantoja in the main event, and I believe the UFC threw a bag at Aldo to be like, hey, come back, try to add some star power to this card that's going down in your hometown or your home country. And now he's just like, you know what, I got to win. Let's try to get another one there. And he's doing it against a very dangerous prospect, a guy that I think is more dangerous than Jonathan Martinez. Now, Mario Bautista, solid winning streak that he's on right now, 6 straight wins. The sixth one, last time around, was against Ricky Simone in a fight where we saw very much improved takedown defense, very much improved get-ups, and then from there he was able to dictate the pace with his striking, very nasty with his combinations, good leg kicks, good knees, good elbows, just throws with such heat in his shots, and I think that's the difference between him and Jonathan Martinez, which is why I understand Bautista being a favorite in this spot. Now, I think a lot of people are kind of FOMOing in this matchup and piling on Jose Aldo because they missed out on him cashing against Martinez. Martinez, but I think Bautista has that ingredient that Martinez does not. And I think that's power and the ability to crack Aldo and make Aldo not get so comfortable in the striking realm. Obviously, a lot of people are bringing up Bautista getting knocked out by Trevin Jones several fights ago. That was a fight where Bautista was winning pretty much every second until he got caught with that uppercut. And obviously something that's Bautista is going to have to worry about here. But Aldo does not seem to be in that stage of his career where he's really chasing finishes. You saw it in the Jonathan Martinez fight. He hurt him badly in that third round, but rather than following up with a barrage of shots, he looked to get the fight to the ground and just grind out the rest of that round. I think he's scared of getting cracked or countered, and I could see him doing the same thing here against Bautista. But we know Bautista can be active and dangerous off of his back as well. He's very good with the elbows off of his back, very active with looking for submissions, but also very good in terms of working back to his feet. In this matchup, I do think that we'll see Bautista be just more dangerous. I think we'll see him crack Aldo a few times, and I think we could actually see him finish Aldo as well. Again, it hurts me to say that. I'm a big Jose Aldo fan. You know, I've been an MMA fan since 2008, watched his rise throughout WEC and the UFC, but at 38 years old, facing a young, hungry guy like Bautista who has finishing power, finishing abilities, and could really contest with Aldo on the feet, based on where they're at in this stage of their career, I think Bautista is worth a shot, and possibly even sprinkling some of that KO or inside the distance prop to try to get a little bit more out of that. So the line has started to come down. I think it was minus 160 for Bautista at the beginning of the week. He's down to about minus 145, minus 140. I could see that line continue to drop a little bit. So maybe some patience and waiting to get a better line on Bautista would be a good way to go about it. But even at minus 140, I think he's more than bettable at this spot. So I'm going to go Bautista inside the distance. Yeah, fun fight. Under 2.5 at around, I think it was roughly around that plus 200 range. Not a bad spot either, considering how much I expect this fight to take place in the striking realm, with Aldo possibly being able to find a knockout as well. All right, that brings us to our first of two title fights of the night, the first of which coming in the women's bantamweight division, as we have Raquel Pennington coming in as a minus 150 favorite, looking to defend her title that she won back in January over Mayra Bueno Silva. She takes on former champion Juliana Pena, who comes in at plus 130. Now, we'll start off on the Pennington side, who, hats off to her. I cannot believe that she actually got to the point where she won a title. You know, coming off the Ultimate Fighter years and years ago, not a lot of people had high expectations or high hopes for her. She had a very salty record, but she's managed to put together a solid winning streak to earn a title shot and eventually win the title against Mayra Bueno Silva. I believe the previous loss that she had was to former champion Amanda Nunes, as Nunes was able to showcase that there are clear levels to the game. Nunes was able to batter her, utilize some grappling, utilize some striking, and win that. I believe she won that fight on the scorecards, or maybe it was a late stoppage there. But Pennington has rounded out her game very well. Very solid striker, good combinations, good fight IQ, knowing when to mix in the grappling as well. That has very much paid off for her. It's just her inability to finish fights that leaves a little bit of a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. You know, she got that submission victory over Macy Chiasson a few fights ago, but for the most part, she's not much of a finishing threat. You know, considering how much Mayra Bueno Silva was huffing and puffing throughout the 25 minutes in their fight, it was very surprising that Pennington was unable to put her foot on the gas and actually get the finish in that matchup. 36 years old. Reached the pinnacle of the sport for herself, was able to get the title, but I wonder how long she's going to be able to defend it. I don't think she'll be able to defend it once. Because I actually like the underdog here in Juliana Pena. Now, Pena, she's pretty much established herself as like the women's Colby Covington, right? She has this boisterous and cocky attitude that not a lot of people like. You know, it was obviously emphasized after she beat Amanda Nunes the first time. She got decimated in the second fight, getting swept on the scorecards, didn't have a minute of success in that matchup. And I think that just goes to show that Nunes really did not take her seriously in that first round or that first fight. And then she showed how there were actually levels to that game in the second fight. But we cannot overlook the wrestling that made Juliana Pena such a highly touted prospect when she came into the UFC. Her submission game, her wrestling, her controlling ability, that made a lot of people say, hey, this fighter could actually be a future champion. Now, she had a few stumbles. Her 3 losses in recent years have come to former champions. Valentina Shevchenko, Jermaine Durandamy. That was a fight, I believe, that she had just come off of a lengthy layoff. I could be wrong on that, but she just didn't look herself. She gassed out. She ended up getting submitted. And then Amanda Nunes, who we know is probably the GOAT at this point in time. But Pena, very strong grappler, very strong wrestler, especially when she can fight fights at her pace. She could be very tough for a lot of opponents to deal with, and I think Pennington could potentially have some issues in that realm here as well. I think Pennington is the better striker, but I don't think it's by a whole lot. I think that the majority of this fight will be contested in the grappling realm, and I think that we'll see Pena have a lot of success in terms of controlling it and fighting this fight at her pace and on her terms. So maybe even Pena by submission is not a way to go about this either. This is closer to a 50-50 fight. I think a lot of people are maybe overreacting to her getting absolutely beat down by Amanda Nunes, but the same thing happened to Raquel Pennington when Pennington faced her, and then put that up against Pennington being on a winning streak, just winning the title. She maybe lost the fight to Ketlin Vieira as well. People aren't looking into it as deep as that. So based on the wrestling advantage and grappling advantage I expect Juliana Pena to have in this matchup, I'm expecting her to go out there, grind this fight out, and possibly even win this fight on this by submission and winning the title here. So give me the underdog shot on Juliana Pena, and you women's bantamweight champion for the second time, Juliana Pena. That brings us to the main event of the evening, which takes place in the light heavyweight division, as company man and champion Alex Poatan Pereira, coming in as a minus 460 favorite, goes up against Khalil Rountree, who currently rides a 5-fight winning streak, and he comes in as the plus 360 underdog. Now we'll start off on Poatan's side, who has been nothing short of the UFC's favorite fighter, considering his ability to just step in at a moment's notice and save cards. He saved UFC 300 as the UFC could not put together matchups that they wanted, so they end up going with Alex Pereira and Jamal Hill. And then he saves UFC 303 on a few weeks' notice as Conor McGregor was forced to pull out of that card. Alex Pereira is halfway across the world in Australia doing seminars and appearances, accepts the fight, saves the card, comes in and knocks out Yuri Prochazka once again in the second round, defending his title for a second time that night. Now he returns with a better and more full training camp, going up against a fellow striker. Now, that might be the qualm that a lot of people have, is that the UFC seemingly gives him striker after striker so that he can go out there and showcase his abilities and continue to win and continue to provide more eyes and pay-per-view buys. A lot of people, including myself, believe that Magomed Ankalaev should actually be the one fighting for the title here, but Ankalaev finds himself in a number one contender fight later on in October, I believe against Alexander Rakic, but should he win that fight, he will and should fight the winner of this matchup. Although if Pereira does end up losing, I'm sure the UFC would give him an immediate rematch. But Pereira, nasty striker, nasty calf kicks. That lead or check left hook is the money button or the money shot for him. The guy goes out there and continuously puts guys out left and right. His just dismantling of Prochazka last time around was a thing of beauty, and then putting a stamp on it with a head kick in the opening seconds of the round of the second round. Beautiful. Masterclass. His defensive grappling is improving, but it seems as though he just waits for his opportunities when he is on his back to eventually explode out and get back to his feet, just as we saw in his fight against Jan Blachowicz, who seems to be the only grappler he's been fighting in recent years, or at least in recent fights. Fun fighter. I love everything about him, and I really think that he's helped fuel this era of the UFC, considering the lack of Conor McGregor that they have and the lack of star power that has really been brought to the table. He goes up against Khalil Rountree, who is a nasty striker in his own right, knockout artist. He's on a 5-fight winning streak, knocking out 4 of those 5 opponents. The one fight that went to a decision against Dustin Jacoby, I really thought Jacoby should have won that fight. I thought it was a bad scorecard and a bad decision, but Rountree ends up benefiting from him, getting 2 straight knockouts, and now finding himself in a title fight. Last time around against Anthony Smith, we saw him dismantle Smith for about 2.5 rounds before he landed a beautiful combination to put Smith out in the third round. And I thought that was the best version of Khalil Rountree that we've ever seen. But I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Anthony Smith is just not that good of a fighter and did not provide enough resistance for Rountree to have too much issues in terms of getting off on his own game. Now, I see a lot of people kind of just calling Khalil's training with Muay Thai in Thailand as something new, but that's something that happened in 2019, and he still found himself on a couple losing fights even after that tremendous performance he had against Eric Anders back in April 2019. But again, he's sky high confidence. Got to a position similar to Raquel Pennington that not a lot of people expected him to get through, especially considering how much of a roller coaster run he had to start off his UFC career. But he's managed to get to this point. Hats off. Credit to him. But I think he's fighting a much superior striker here in Pereira, who should be able to touch him up and eventually find a knockout of his own, maybe in the second or third round. With that said, though, minus 460 is a little bit too much to pay in a fight where he's going up against a knockout artist like Khalil Rountree, and knowing this fight is likely going to take place in the striking round for pretty much every second. We have to remember that Pereira was put out by Israel Adesanya last year, a guy that does not have nearly the knockout power that we expect from Khalil Rountree. And if Adesanya can do it, it's possible that Rountree can do it as well. So I think if you are going to be parlaying Alex Pereira here, the best way to go about it is put a little bit of a hedge on Khalil Rountree, either by knockout or Rountree by round 1 knockout plus 1050, round 2 knockout plus 1250, round 3 knockout plus 2100. Even putting 0.1 unit on that could prove to be fruitful, especially if Rountree ends up pulling off the upset here. But I do think Pereira will be able to control this fight. I think he is skilled enough. I think he is defensively responsible enough to avoid the big power of Rountree and then eventually set up his knockout shot and get Rountree out of there. So, again, very volatile considering the power that both of these men possess. But I do think that Pereira is the superior fighter here, superior striker, and he should be able to get the job done here by knockout. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC 307. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the breakdown. Hopefully you guys were able to cash on the Contender Series yesterday. I'll be back for another Contender Series breakdown on Monday, but I got still a bunch of other great content dropping throughout the week for UFC 307, so stay tuned for that. And also ACA 26 fights going down on Friday morning. I will have you guys covered in written form on the MMALOTN Patreon page, so check the link in the description below for that, as well as all the track plays and other fun stuff that I drop on the Patreon for the UFC cards. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate all the support. Drop a comment, drop a like, drop a subscribe if you haven't already. I'm getting damn close to 8,000 subscribers. I would love to hit that before the end of the month. We'll see if we can get there. Good luck on all your action this weekend, folks. And I'll see you guys again later today for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. Peace.